Alrighty, so today's session, as I mentioned, is Commercial 101. So we are looking at commercial functionality. We're looking at some of the things you can do, and we're going to be drilling down into really three key areas or three key tips we have. Now, one of the things we did do is we did have a chat with a lot of our clients who are using commercial, and we found out what they were and they weren't using. And today we're actually going to highlight a whole lot of functionality that a lot of people either don't know exists in Console Cloud or that they're not using. And this is the stuff that might be getting you out of the spreadsheets and into Console Cloud. So first of all, we're going to start with a little bit of a look at some of the key data we want to get set up. And that is not just having things like buildings in place, but also looking at how tenant rent invoices and outgoings can be set up to save you time and to make your day-to-day easier. We're also going to look at CPI reviews. So one thing we've found out is a lot of people don't know that you can manage your CPI reviews in Console Cloud and that it can accommodate for any shortfalls that might be due to the CPI. And then we're going to have a look at how compliance and insurance can be managed. So managing our tenant and owner compliance and insurance in Console Cloud with the commercial workflows. So again, getting you out of the spreadsheets and into Console. Now, we are going to keep things a little bit high level today. We're not going to go too deep. So keep in mind anything that we cover that you're not sure about, all sitting in the Help Center or Console Academy. And you can reach out to training@console.com.au, where we have our team sitting there ready to help you. Now, with that, I am going to jump across to Console. Now, with our Console commercial, one thing to keep in mind is how you set up and manage your buildings, your properties, your owners, and your tenancies. Now, from the get-go, you want to make sure you have things up and running and accurately entered, and you want to make sure that it's set up so that you can simply have Console run it for you. Now, one thing to keep in mind is if you would like to use the tools or the functionality of buildings in commercial. So a building in Console Cloud is a really great way to group commonly owned properties and leases together. Now I'm just sitting in properties, I'm sitting in commercial, and I'm just going to filter down here and I'm going to filter to my buildings. Now you can see I've got a couple of buildings set up here. And under these buildings, you can see both the owner and the number of tenancies sitting within there. So if I jumped into Jackson Road here, common ownership, Alf Jones owns all of the buildings or all of the properties that are linked under this building. And then I can see the properties attached, and I can also see the outgoings, the split between those tenancies. So our tenant here in level 1 is accountable for 10% of the outgoing actuals. Unit 5 level 2, also 10%. Got a second one in level 1, also 10%. Now these properties and their leases are linked by the fact that they are a common ownership with a common address. So if I wanted to add a new one, 3 dots, add new, and I'm linking in another commonly owned property. Hit save, and you can see here, now I have that next property available. This one's actually vacant, so I don't have any rental income and I don't have any outgoings attached to it. Now let's dive into the property. Let's have a look at the ownership and the tenancy and have a look at some of the things you guys might want to make sure you've got set up there. So popping straight through to the property here, just highlighting on the ownership, some key things you want to consider is around your GST and your flags. Now we're not going to enter an ownership for this webinar, but I do want to highlight that with your commercial owners, really important you want to get that GST flag right. Also really important that you have a look at those fees. So for any fees on rent, any rent commission fees, is it calculating from the net rent received? And does the fee include or exclude GST? So something to consider with your ownerships. Now let's get a tenancy added and let's really drill in on things like their rent and their invoices and outgoings. So I'm going to hit add new tenancy. And I'm just going to hide this little buddy here. And then we're going to start with getting some data in. So I'm going to make it nice and easy. I'm going to use an existing contact just for today. Search for the lovely Sue Johnson here. Of course, calling out that if you have multiple contacts, you can add new contacts or you can link existing contacts. Hitting save and next, and then we are getting into the lease details. So again, I'm going to pop in the inaugural lease and the lease start. I'm going to pop in the lease end. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop in some notes as well. So one of the enhancements that I will talk about as coming soon is around how we manage our tenancy and our lease options. For the interim, I'm going to make sure I've got any lease options documented here in the description. This is a 2x3 by 3. Then popping down, we have our inclusions. We can choose around any water charging, and we can choose whether there are any agency fees on any rental receipts. Now coming down, this is one of our recent enhancements, is around how we actually look at our rental calculation. So I'm going to pop in the lease does include GST. I can then choose whether I enter the rent as net or gross value. And then I can put down if I've got an annual agreed rent amount, I can pop that in here. So if this was 54,000 gross, and then I select my rent period. So in this case, let's go monthly. It's actually going to start calculating it down for me. So annual gross rent, 54,000, rent 4,500 per month. And now it's giving me that rent calculation. If for some reason the invoice does not align to the rent, it's actually going to show you here as well. So if there is some discrepancy between annual net rent and rent, your monthly rent, it is going to give you that calculation here, and it's going to give you a little prompt to actually go and have a look at why. So little enhancement we've done recently, allowing you to put in your annual net rent as either a gross or a net amount, then picking the rent period, allowing it to calculate for you, and then providing that calculation. Now let's see if I can push it a little bit. Here we go. So I've changed it to weekly. It's now shown me there is a slight difference between annual net rent and annual invoiced rent just through that calculation. But because I'm going monthly, we're all good. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is your bond. So is it held in trust? Is it held externally? And if it is held externally, you want to just pop in where it is being held and then pop in the information behind that. So if you do need to do any bond reconciliations, if you do want to report on any of your commercial bonds, really easy to see that in console. I'm going to pop held in trust. I've got my bond amount. I can update this. So it's $5,000 flat. I have not received any. Now, then we get down to our invoices and our outgoing. So this is one of the areas where if you get console set up well, if you use it well, it's going to save you a lot of time. So first things first, do you want to send your recurring rent invoices? Yes or no? Not required, but if you do have invoices that go to tenants for rent, pop in and tick that. Then select how often they go. So I'm going to send mine monthly. I'm going to select the date it's sent and the due date. Now I can manually select the due date, or I can simply select last day of the month. You've then got a couple of options here. So do you want to show the current rent period or do you want to show the next rent period? So just showing where it is, you might have the next rent period on this. This then might be that you are manually invoicing for the first rent period, you've already taken funds for it, etc. So just keep in mind what's appropriate for that tenancy. And then there is the magic one here, rent amount to invoice. Now this is one that a lot of people don't understand or don't identify what that actually does for you. Now, if you match rent, this will take into account any of your rent reviews, any debits, any credits, any shortfalls. It will always update based on what the tenancy agreement and based on the rent reviews that you've been putting into Console Cloud. So this one is really easy, This one will keep your rent up to date. You won't need to manually invoice for any shortfalls or any debits as a result of CPI. So that's a good one to save you a bit of time. However, don't have to use that. You can do a fixed amount where you just enter in the amount that you are going to invoice monthly, pick whether it includes GST or not, and off you go. This just means down the line that you will have to manually update things. But I'm going to select match rent. I want to keep it nice and simple. And then I can choose around my outgoings. So another one you want to make sure is right and you have set up to save yourself a bit of time. Now we have two options here. We have the recurring outgoings. So if you have budgeted outgoings as part of your tenancy lease agreement, you can create these to send. And in this case, you can send combined with rent invoices on that same monthly cadence. So for example, if he had water, we'd agreed that flat rate, you're going to charge 500. I could simply add that in, add another line item, and just keep adding those in. Now that is if you've got them as budgeted outgoings, set amounts regularly, perhaps aligned with rent. Now the other one is if you have outgoings chargeable based on actuals. So in this case, this is a commonly owned property. It's part of a building. This tenancy has a liability percentage. So the other tenancies all pay 10%. This one here, he's a bit bigger, has more electricity, more water, basically more cleaning. So his liability percentage is going to be 20%. When we process bills and we on charge, this is then going to go, great, okay, well, my tenancy here is liable to pay back 20% of anything that it comes under the dissection water rates. Also 20% of anything under electrical. And last one, cleaning services, also accountable for 20% of those cleaning services. So these are the really key things that if you get them set up, it's going to save you some time and going to make sure that you're not missing out on any of that income or your owners aren't being charged incorrectly. So I'm just going to pop up again here and just recap some of these things that you do want to make sure you've got right. So your rent. Does the lease include GST? What's your annual gross rent if it's an annual agreement? Is it gross or net? And then checking that annual rent calculation. Where is your bond held? Down the road, you might want to do a bond reconciliation. Is it held in trust? Is it held externally? Are you sending recurring rent invoices? And if you're sending recurring rent invoices, do you want it to match rent? Meaning that you will then always have it up to date based on what you tell Console Cloud. Your outgoings. Are they budgeted outgoings that you're just going to keep sending as part of the rent invoice? Or is it based on actuals? So when you get a bill in, is the on charge based on the actual bill? So really key, get those right. Again, save you a bit of time. Now I'm going to hit save and next. And then what we've got here as well is our scheduled rent reviews. So depending on the leases that you've signed, you've probably got all of that sitting there ready to go. You know exactly what's happening. If you do, let's pop them in because Console is going to take care of a heck of a lot for you. So starting a year from now, he's going to have a CPI increase. Second year of the lease, also a CPI increase. Once we get onto his second term option, so if he renews for the additional 3 years, he's going on to a percentage increase. So he's going 5% and then so on and so forth. So you can enter all of these in. You can come back at any point and delete them if you need to or update them. And then you can also manage that CPI changes as part of the rent review workflow. So got those all in, just hit rent start, the type CPI fixed or percentage, popped in the amount, and now I'm just going to hit save. So with that, my tenant is now in place. I've got my lease term details there. I've got any inclusions and rent details put in place. And as I scroll down, I'm also going to see things such as the rent reviews. So again, I mentioned you could edit or delete those 3 dots, edit, delete. And we have the option for deductions and invoice credits. So another thing you do want to think about, and something of a trap, is people who you might have waived some rent, you might have an agreement that they're not paying while certain services are unavailable. Little habit people fall into, particularly with new tenancies, is they might come through and update the pay to date. Now, we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we have all of those credits accounted for and in the system. Now, we have our standard rent deductions. If we are using our standard rent tools, we aren't using invoicing, we could simply hit add deduction, add the amount, add a description, and hit add. If, like I am, we're using invoices, we might want to use our invoice credits. This is quite a sophisticated tool. So if I hit add new, I have the option of doing invoice credits for rent. If I had budgeted outgoings in place, I could do that as well. I can then put in the amount. I can select the effective period. So is it effective immediately or is it effective in a certain period? So let's say we've given them a Christmas present or the owner has waived certain time periods. Pop that in. And then I can set whether it's recurring. So in the case that perhaps, yes, they have work happening in the car park, they've lost 5 out of their 10 car spots. This might impact business productivity. And it's going to be for 3 months. I could say every month, 3 months. It's going to then automatically add it to those months. If it's every year and it's once a year, we'll do that. Or maybe it's twice a year or 3 times. So it's calculating this for you. It's telling you how often it's going to recur. It's telling you when. And it's really good for any of those credits you might come in as part of the initial agreement, anything as part of a re-sign or an option, or anything as part of perhaps an impact to this tenancy's success. So I'm going to hit save. I'm going to add that in. My tenancy is now going to get 3 months discounted rent. So I'm going to say signing reduction on rent as per agreement. Hit save. We've got those credits in place. Now, that's all entered, ready to go. My tenancy's set up. I've got that key data in place and it's linked to the building as well. So straight from that building oversight, I now can see all of this sitting underneath. From here, your normal accounting processes take place. So you're receipting, you're allocating to invoices, and as you're processing bills, you're able to on charge for those dissections. So that's part 1, or my top tip for number 1 is get your data in right first. Make sure your tenancies are set up with the correct invoicing. Make sure outgoings are accounted for. Make sure your rent reviews are accounted for. Make sure your credits are in place. And then suddenly Console starts taking care of that work for you. Now, what I'll have a look at next is I'll have a look at just that next evolution of what happens when we get to a CPI increase. Now, this is another top tip. A lot of people have been using CPI or managing CPI increases manually, going in, checking the CPI, doing the math on what's going to change in the rent, adding or updating the rent schedule, and then manually invoicing for it. Now, with the setup I've just done, you don't actually need to do that. So I'm quickly going to change offices and we're going to go into our rent review workflow. So I'm going to come down to properties. I'm going to come down to commercial. And then I'm going to pop across to my rent reviews. Now you can see at the top, we've got this little flag here that we have some CPI increases to review. So I'm going to hit review CPI. And you can see here the historic and the current fiscal quarters I need to enter. So Console Cloud's going to prompt you when we're approaching the time of a new CPI change. It's going to open up a new quarter. We're going to pop in the new amount and we're going to hit approve. So let's say tough financial year. We've all been having a little go of it, haven't we? Let's say this year was a 2% increase. So I'd be entering it's a 2% CPI increase and I'll hit approve. Now this is you've got to be really sure. Can't change it afterwards. So you make sure you get that CPI, get it accurate, enter it in console. The great thing is this doesn't actually lock you to applying that to your tenancies. So if I have a look here, you can see how many I have applied of my previous and my current CPI change. So I'm going to click in here and I've got my tenancy here with a CPI increase. Now, if it is just standard CPI, great, ticket, apply, off we go. If for some reason we are waiving or changing it, then we hit the edit pencil. So with the edit pencil, I can overwrite the default CPI. So let's say maybe this tenancy is on 2% or on CPI plus 2%. I could enter 4%. Perhaps you've been working and negotiating between the tenancy and the owner, and we're going for only a 1% increase due to financial hardship. Entering in that new percentage, hit apply, and that has now applied it. Now I'm just going to click here on view latest CPI report. I'm going to have a little look at what that report shows me. So let me get a slightly better one for you guys. I think that was a very easy one. One tenancy change. So let me open this up here and share my screen. Alrighty. So now I'll just pop over to my Excel here. And this is what that export looks like. So what it's telling me is what's the tenancy and the property? What is the GST on the rent versus the current rent? When does the new rent apply and how much? And then we also have any adjustments. So Franco's Fish, he's on a match rent, recurring rent. So we actually have to do some adjustments on his pay to date or on his balances. So it's telling me how much we've pulled his balances back. $234. And then another one here, we have another CPI adjustment for a particular period of $99 as a debt. So it's entering those adjustments, it's calculating where the tenancy is now. On the next invoices, it will be adding those in as shortfalls for their debit, for their payment dates. So taking care of all of that for you. So just to recap, if you are managing CPI changes, you can come into commercial, rent reviews workflow, review CPI. Now you can see this one's locked now. You enter in the new amount and approve it. Once it's entered, you then apply it to the tenancies and you have the option to overwrite the default amount. So that is top tip number 2, use Console to do your CPI reviews. CPI will automatically calculate any debits or credits as a result of that rent change. Will also calculate the tenant payment date will be updated as well. Now, the next thing we'll have a look at is we'll have a look at another area of commercial that a lot of people don't know can be managed effectively in Console, and that is our compliance and our insurance for both our owners and our tenancies. So this is number 1 on probably those get it out of the spreadsheets, get it into your system. So I'm going to quickly pop into my tenancy here. So let's find him here. Beautiful. And then you can do this from either the property or the tenancy or the owner, but I'm just going to sit in the property. It's very easy. You can do all of it in one go. Just in the insurance and the compliance, we're using these 3 dots. This is where you can add your owner insurance and your tenant insurance. If you've added against the owner or the tenant, it will appear through here. So 3 dots, add owner insurance. We can select what it is. So in this case, landlord protection. We can enter our insurer and policy number, and we can pop in our expiry date. So I'm going to put this in for next year. And we could add in more. So we could add in additional policies as we need. Again, 3 dots, add tenant insurance. It's going to pull through the tenancy. We can add in our policy type, so professional indemnity, insurer, policy number, and expiry date. With this one here, we also can add in any certificates and any notes. So if there's anything you'd like to add in here as well, if you want to upload the certificate, you can do it here or store it in the documents section against your relevant file. Hit save, and then exactly the same under our compliance. So this is just falling into that once you get your properties and your owners and your tenancies in there, get the right information in there too. So compliance, 3 dots. Owner compliance, in here you can choose what you have. So in this case, I'm going to do essential safety management first, whether it's assigned to the creditor, the owner, or a body corporate. So in this question, I'm going to go owner, pop in the last inspected, and pop in the expiry date. Again, uploading certificates for storage and hitting save. 3 dots, repeating again, add tenant. So in this case, let's just pop in fire, but again, plenty of options here. Popping in last inspected, popping in expiry date, and uploading certificates. So all of these, if you do need to tap onto them, you just click onto the particular item, 3 dots, edit or delete, and you can add in additional from here using those 3 dots. So that's your general data entry at the point of getting it into Console Cloud. You don't have to then manually go and find this information again and again and again. That's where our workflows will help you manage all of these upcoming expiries. So if you're looking at this from a workflow perspective, you might come into your commercial property list and you might have your particular workflows flagged up the top. Now, up the top, we have compliance, tenant insurance that I have optimized here. Now, let's look at our insurance and compliance first for tenants. Tapping into a particular workflow, it's going to show me those that I have filtered out to. So if I pop on filters and I go everything that is due in 120 days, hit apply, I now have a list of my tenants, the properties, the type of service that needs to be renewed, and the expiry date. So from here, I could do bulk or I could do individual communication. So bulk select, hit message, and then I can use a template. So I'm going to pop in one of my default templates just to call out. You can create as many as you want. So to make your life easier, add in as many templates as you need to do this, because the more you do with Console Cloud, not only is it tracked, but it's a bit more automated. So hit send, boom, off we go. I've just reminded everyone. Now Diana comes back. Her expiry is in 5 days, just in time. I'm going to tap straight into Diana. 3 dots. I can edit and I can update the details of that. So was inspected today. It is now expiring a year from now. Let's pop this in for the 16th of the 10th, 2024. Oop. And again, this is where you'd want to update those certificates. Hit save. That's updated. She's pulled out of my workflow because the expiry date is now future dated. So very, very simple. I can also do individual communication just by ticking and hit message, or tapping in and updating those details as applicable. Now that's your tenant compliance. Your tenant insurance, very, very similar. If I tapped into tenant insurance, again, I could filter. I could keep it due on 120 days. It's going to keep, retain, and apply that. Tapping in, 3 dots, I can edit particular compliance or insurance pieces. I can do bulk communication and message, or I can do individual. Also have the option to download here. So if you've let your account run a little bit, you haven't been updating this, you can bulk select, you can export to CSV, and you can sit there with a highlighter working through it right next to you. And then the last little one you might want to look at here is your compliance. So I currently have automation turned on for my account, meaning that compliance is doing most of the work for me. So what the compliance workflow allows you to do is it allows you to turn on certain automation around communications to remind people to then bring back compliance items. So I'm just going to pop quickly on here and I'm going to have a look at the settings for compliance and talk through it. Just hitting the edit pencil. So in my system, compliance items will be automatically added to the workflow 30 days before expiry. Once that happens, it's going to automatically start emailing requests. So depending on how it's set up, if it's set up applicable to the owner, to the creditor, to body corp, it's going to shoot a request to that person. It's going to use templated communications. And then it's going to send them a reminder. So if they haven't come back and updated it, it's going to automatically remind them. When I upload certain certificates, it's then going to send that compliance certificate out as well. Now, this is optional. You can turn all of this off. So let's say I don't want anything here. No worries. And then it will automatically finalize. So that's a great little tool. So let's say I get a certificate, I upload my certificate, it'll automatically finalize it once I hit save. But you don't have to do it automatically. You can do it manually. If I have a look through this list, dropping into a particular compliance item, I can work through that compliance item. So 29 Dorchester, Diane Young, she has her essential safety management due. If I hit update details, I can attach a certificate, I can add a last inspection, and I can update that expiry date. I can hit save. And then because I've done that and I've got my automation turned on, it's automatically completed it for me. I can filter between quick key areas as well. So if I want to look at anything due within 7 days, quick filter clears down my list. I can start working those key ones. I can look at those that have no action taken. So perhaps I've got automation off. I want to make sure I'm calling through those that haven't taken action so that I can get the updated information. Or is there any non-compliance? So is there anything that is non-compliant? Here. And once I've got it, update details, finalize compliance. So really good area, really key to work through, really key to give you guys a little bit of more control, a little bit more oversight, a little bit more automation on some of these things. So just recapping what I just went through as another top tip, if I pop into a property here, down the bottom, I can add in insurance and compliance for both my owners and tenants. Console Cloud will look at both the compliance type as well as the expiry date on your insurance and your compliance. As certain dates come up, they'll fall into your workflows here. So compliance, tenant insurance. You can then automatically use Console to send out notifications and reminders for compliance. You can then automatically complete and send notifications when certificates are uploaded. Or you can manually work through compliance, sending messages, updating details, and finalizing. With your compliance and insurance for your tenants, popping into either list, you can bulk communicate by selecting and hitting message, or simply work through one at a time. And once you've got updated information, editing and updating that, which will then pull it out of those workflows. Remembering that all of these communications, all of these documents are then tracked against your properties, your owners, and your tenants in Console Cloud for you. Okay, so I can see there's some great questions coming into the chat there. I can see Will's a bit busy. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to recap that, and then we're going to talk about what's coming next in terms of commercial. There has been a lot of work behind the scenes. We have our commercial product manager, Kent, working quite quickly and hard on getting some good commercial features out to you, some which are currently in our beta now. So the first thing we had a look at was we had a look at a building. Now in commercial, you've got two options when adding a property. You can add a building or a property. Now a building is a way of grouping and managing commonly owned properties and their leases. If I was to jump into one of my buildings here, let's go down to Jackson Road. Alfie, my owner, is sitting up the top. Can see a summary of Alfie here. And then I can see the properties and their associated tenancies, including their rental income and their outgoings recoverable. So these guys all split outgoings based on tenancy. I can see that there. Walking into a property, we had a quick chat about our ownership, making sure our GST flags are correct, making sure with our fees the GST is ticked and we know whether to charge the fee on the net or the total of rent. And in our tenancy, we had a look at getting that agreement set up really, really well so that we don't have to do too much work. So coming down, we looked at the annual gross rent. We looked at the calculations, which then automatically populated the rent here. We then looked at our recurring rent invoices. So picking match rent so that it will automatically update with things like rent reviews, CPI changes, debits, credits. We did outgoings chargeable based on actuals. But again, you've got the option. So if you have budgeted outgoings, you can pop that in here and send it combined with your rent invoices. We also set up the rent reviews. So under our tenancy, we set up some rent reviews here, making sure we account for the next few years. So we have our initial CPI updates or our CPI reviews. We then have our percentages as flat for the next few years. Because our owner is very lovely, we also had our invoice credit. So we set up a 3-month recurring invoice credit for $500 from the rent. You can see that the first one's already applied here. Now, just before we jump into our workflows, again, we had a look at our owner and our tenant insurance and compliance, making sure those were added in. And then having a look at our commercial workflows and some of the things you can do to get out of the spreadsheet. So making sure those compliance items are managed, whether it is through bulk communication and updates, or whether it's through our compliance automations. We also had a look at our rent reviews. So we had a look at how you can review CPI and then how you can apply it to tenancies. And just a callback, you don't have to bulk apply all of those tenancies in one go. So if it's a 2% increase, or in this case 0.5, not all of them need 0.5. So depending on the tenancy, depending on the agreement, depending on everything, you can then change it per tenancy. And of course, view latest CPI report here. This is where you can then review any of the debits or credits that are applied as part of that CPI change. Now, I am going to just do a quick little chat about what's been released or what's coming soon. Now, just released, we did release our annualized rent, so what I just showed you, and we also have changed the default GST behavior. So whenever we do our rent reviews, automatically console is going to be accounting for whether the rent is inclusive or exclusive of GST, and it's always going to be 100% accurate. Now, coming soon, we have some really exciting things. So first of all, we have enhanced lease management. So one of the things we want to make sure you guys can do is manage all of those lease options and renewals that you may have with your tenancies. So having had a sneak peek of this already looks pretty good, but it's going to really enhance that lease renewal process for you, making sure that your tenancies who are on commercial options are all accounted for, and again, using our workflows to help out with that. We also have installment bills coming soon. So again, another one that we've had a little bit of a look at. So we'll be looking at installment bills allowing you to split out multiple payments. And then we also have aged or outstanding debts about to surface on our tenancy invoices. So we will have that appear on invoices. If a tenant is running a bit behind, there'll be a little category, there'll be a flow, and hopefully you guys won't see too much of each tenant that is outstanding. So if the tenant has 5 or 6 invoices outstanding, you will see that on that invoice, and so will they. Now I am going to just do a quick whip into the chat, make sure that we've got most. It looks like Will has been very busy. And one thing I'll just quickly share for you guys, I'll share my screen here, is a question we had around banking. So with the charging of fees on commercial rent credits, there is an option in here. This was a question in the chat, and you can charge your banking, and then down in banking, there's commercial, charge fees on commercial rent credits, so you don't miss out on your income. Great question, and I have loved to see all of the participation through the chat there. Okay, so let's do a quick recap, and whilst I do that, Will is going to pop a quick feedback survey into the chat. So we had a look at some key areas today. We didn't go deep into each piece of functionality. There's a lot there with commercial. We had a look at the top ones that we've noticed that people aren't aware of or don't use, but can use, which are really going to help save you time. So we had a look at the invoicing and the outgoings. So how we can help set up tenant rent and how we can then make it automated and a bit more set and forget for us. We had a look at those rent reviews, so making sure they're in place, they're set there, and then making sure we manage those CPI reviews. Remembering that each CPI review, even though we have a blanket CPI number, does not necessarily need to be applied as blanket. Also remembering we have that great export that shows us any changes to the tenancy balance or the tenancy payment date based on that CPI change. And then we had a bit of a chat around our compliance and insurance. So where you can store your owner and tenant compliance and insurance, where you can access it in the workflows, and some of the things you can do in there. Now, that brings us to the end of our session today. All there for you guys is recorded. Reach out to training@console.com.au so that we can then help out with anything else you might need. Reach out to our support teams if you have any further questions, and then hopefully we will see you in one of our upcoming webinars. Thank you very much.